Chinoi, the former Indian ambassador to Japan and currently Director General, Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, brings a whole range of experience, on-the-ground experience in Japan, apart from the fact, strategic and other issues. So, Sujan, welcome to this thing. And we have Kyoko Hokugo, I hope I've got that right, Minister Economic and Development at the Embassy of Japan, India, and she's going to talk about the economic relations. And this session, let me also welcome Geeta Mohan, our Foreign Affairs Editor, and we are going to do a double-engine thing on them. So let's invite Sujan Chinoi to deliver a quick 10 minutes as to how he sees the perspective, the game changers that he sees it. Let's give him a warm round of applause. Thank you.
So look, I was given 20 minutes, but it's now 10 minutes, and I better actually, behave like the Shinkansen itself, taking off on time, arriving on time. Let me begin by firstly thanking you, Raj Changappa, for this invitation. This is, in fact, a very opportune moment, and for the ones that are still having their, tea and coffee, frankly, for me, it's like tea, coffee, or me. So I would rather that you choose me over the tea and coffee, but I leave it to you. Now, there are four main reasons why it's very opportune to look at India-Japan relations today. First off, it's the 70th anniversary, no less. Secondly, we are all coming out of the ravages of the pandemic. We are in a global economic recovery phase, and it's an opportune moment to look at how India and Japan can connect, especially with regard to trade and investment ties. The third reason is the conflict in Ukraine. For several questions have been raised about whether this actually impacts on our strategic partnership in any manner. And let me begin by disabusing the naysayers straight away. It does not impact on our special strategic and global partnership. There's enough space in this relationship for us to be able to navigate our way forward in a most understanding manner. And the fourth point is that it's the post-Abe period. With the passage of that, colossus from the stage of India-Japan relations, a number of questions have been raised about whether we can actually keep up the momentum. And I'd say there are fundamentally three good reasons why we should say that the momentum will not be affected. First off, this relationship, though it was, greatly nurtured by the leadership in India at the level of Prime Minister Modi and in Japan at the level of Prime Minister Abe, the relationship is much bigger. It goes beyond that. And it's anchored in our shared values and our ancient civilizational ethos and much more. The second reason is that we've now got Ambassador Hiroshi Suzuki as the Japanese ambassador here, and he brings continuity to the relationship. The third very big reason is that Prime Minister Kishida himself is a former member of that great team that achieved so much over the past decade. He himself was Foreign Minister of Japan for 5 years, and I've seen him work up front very closely. Our civilizational relationship is anchored in ancient times, and we share so many of these deities as well, like Benzai Ten and Kangi Ten and Sho Ten and Kichijo Ten. These all translate variously into Shiva and Ganesh and Saraswati and Lakshmi, etc. But for me, Japan has a very personal, special place in my heart. I began my association nearly 45 years ago with Japan. I was not in the Foreign Service at that point of time, and there was an essay competition in my university, in the Gujarat University, in which I decided to participate. One had to write an essay on Japan and its ancient history and culture, and lo and behold, I got the first prize. It entailed going to Japan as an exchange student, and that really changed my life. I spent a few months at the Otemon Gakuin University in Osaka. That's the oldest unbroken students' exchange program between the two countries, which began in 1971 and continues till today. Exposure to Japan literally at the age of 20 left me reeling. I mean, I was truly taken up with what technology could do to a country that had risen phoenix-like from the ashes of the Second World War and achieved so much. And when I went to Japan in '78, Japan was really at the peak of its economic development. It was riding high as one of the biggest trading nations in the world, and the only place in Asia where you could see skyscrapers. Today you can see them all over. It was also the only place in Asia that could be counted as a piece of the West for its times. And when I, therefore, went to Japan, I was also given a Daruma doll. I don't know how many of you know that the Daruma represents Bodhidharma, who went from the Mamallapuram area of Tamil Nadu in the 5th century AD. And when I landed there and got the Daruma doll, quickly painted in one eye, as we are required to do. The other eye is required to be painted in when one's wish is fulfilled. And so I could actually, having preserved that Daruma doll, I painted in the other eye only in 2015 when I went there as ambassador. I gave an interview to the Yomiuri Shimbun. I still have the cutting, dating back to 1978. And I was asked what would I wish to do with my life, and I said, I want to, watashi wa gaikokan ni naritai desu. And I want to come back, I want to become a diplomat, and I want to come back to Japan. And that's why I painted in the other eye. Listen, I want to mention how different I found Japan when I went in 2015. In 1978, Japan was, to my mind, a very confident country. It was, as I said, riding high. It had achieved so much. The economic growth rates had been at a peak level. There was great all-round prosperity. But when I went in 2015, I found that Japan was slightly different. It was different because the society had aged, economic growth rates had plateaued, and I think foremost for the people of Japan was to keep things steady, on course, notwithstanding the rising sort of threat of a big economy like China, one that had created tremendous interdependencies with Japan, and notwithstanding the fact that North Korea was also acting the way it is known to act with its missile and nuclear tests. I also found that the Japanese people had not lost any of their touch for excellence, perfection, research and development, innovation, their fabled hospitality. But the younger generation was not quite as interested in the world beyond Japan. I did notice that as well. And that was a far cry from what I had seen among the students in the 1970s. So that's something that I noticed. And Japan obviously was no longer Asia's largest economy. By the way, it still is the world's second largest developed economy. And that's something that stands in its stead. Now, Japan is, as a game changer, let me come to a few points there. It's been a tremendous game changer for many countries. After the 70s, when China began to open up, modernize, engage in its open door policy, Japan was not far behind the United States in normalizing relations and played a very big role in the emergence of China as a global manufacturing center. Most of Japan's supply chains and supply lines began to implant themselves in the very fertile soil of the Chinese economy. And so many of the tremendous changes that you see today in China, it's also thanks to Japan and its generosity, its largesse. For Japan has been very forthcoming in helping China for many years, at least until 2018, I think, through ODA, but with also vast dollops of trade and investment ties. On the other hand, China has been fairly extractive in this relationship, squeezing the last bit out of Japan, forcing it to always, ride that guilt of the past, and no amount of redressal by Japan seems to be enough. Japan is also today wary of putting all its eggs in one basket. It obviously has been looking at a China plus policy, and India is seen as a wonderful alternative to China. The Japanese government and industry both regard India increasingly as integral to any risk mitigation strategy. Now, it's also, I must caution you here, it's also not as if, as part of a major relocation policy, it's not as if all Japanese companies are dying to leave China or dying to come to India. This requires a lot of hard work. And that's where I think I would echo the sentiments expressed in a previous panel, that there's much work to be done at this end. We have a lot of investments coming in, as you're aware. But when we take a look over the last year and a half at the relocation of Japanese companies, we find that as part of their US dollars $3.2 billion aid and assistance package, most of which was meant, of course, for relocation to Japan, we find that of all the companies that left for third country destinations, most of them went to Southeast Asia. Very few came to India. In fact, in that first phase, I found only 2 companies coming to India. And to me, it means that we need to take a page out of the Chinese book and the Vietnamese book in order to see how best we can cultivate the Japanese companies. And what I have to say also applies to Korean companies. So let's put it this way, that good political relations does not necessarily translate automatically into very, very deep and abiding trade and investment ties. Conversely, political friction, geopolitical difficulties, such as what we see between Japan and China, is not enough to actually translate into a cutoff in economic ties. The world is far more complex and interdependent today. And for India, Japan is a brand. It stands for, perfection. It stands for Kaizen, which is this constant innovation and improvement, or monotsukuri, the synthesis of technological know-how, and merging that with the spirit of Japan's best practices in manufacturing. And so this is something of great relevance to India, the standardization of our technologies, the skilling of our labor force. And I must tell you that in my capacity as the advisory patron of the Indo-Japan Friendship Society of Gujarat, I have also contributed to the creation of the first ever Japanese garden in India. That's in Ahmedabad. It's outside the Ahmedabad Management Association. We call it the Zen Kaizen Garden. I had requested the Honorable Prime Minister to inaugurate it, and he very graciously did that last year. Any one of you visiting Ahmedabad is welcome to visit that, and we will not charge you a ticket if you contact me, even though the ticket is only 50 rupees. But one of the earliest examples of Japan as a game changer is to be found, as has already been said, in the automotive sector. When Suzuki came to India nearly 4 decades ago, they fundamentally transformed the landscape of not just automotive manufacturing, but manufacturing in general. And I think India has never looked back since, insofar as the automotive sector is concerned. Today, India is itself one of the largest automotive hubs in the world, and also a very big major exporter. Some manufacturing today in India by Japanese companies also sees products going back to Japan, not to speak of other parts of the world, including Mexico. That's like taking coal to Newcastle, selling cars out of India to Mexico, you know that. I also want to mention the railway sector, because the Prime Minister himself said in 2017, during Prime Minister Abe's visit there, that this sector is fundamental to further change that we want to see in the vast railway sector in India. India is expanding its railways in order to keep up with its rapidly expanding economy. And we have to be mindful of safety and other standards. And it is this great association with Japan, this piggybacking tandem with Japan, that's going to get us those fantastic standards of safety and security on our tracks. And whether it is high speed or whether it is, normal railway tracks, we need the Japanese there with us. By the way, when I went to Japan in 1978, there were very few foreigners there. In the workforce, there was practically no presence of the Chinese, the Vietnamese, the Filipinos. In 2015, much to my bewilderment, I realized that the workforce in Japan was rapidly expanding to include the Chinese, the Vietnamese, the Filipinos, and India, while claiming to be the HR capital of the world, wanting to provide workforce to the rest of the world, was absent. And that is how I cottoned on to this idea of working on the technical intern training program. It was not really an internship, it was the job market in which Indians could also come in, provided the structures were in place for 3 to 5 years, work in the Japanese space, imbibe all those good practices, come back to India, as I thought, and become the nuclei for further change in India. And that is how today, with great satisfaction, I look back and see that we have the specialized skilled workers program in place, having contributed to it right from the very beginning. The other big thing that I found was the possibility of using Japan as a game changer in healthcare. So about a year before we actually publicly announced our Ayushman Bharat program, I had been actually working with the Japanese system, including Ambassador Hiroshi Suzuki, Mr. Izumi, etc., in the Prime Minister's office, to see how best we could actually bring them in, because Japan has fantastic experience with geriatric care, for instance, with trauma care, and reducing the carbon footprint of healthcare in general, hospitals especially. And therefore, I think we have done well to have them come on board as our very first foreign partner to link up with the Ayushman Bharat program. Japan is present, as you all know, in virtually every flagship program, too numerous for me to mention. People have spoken about the metro, people have spoken about many other areas. But I do see that there are areas like disaster risk reduction, where Japan has fantastic experience, and no wonder that Japan is one of our key partners in this coalition for disaster-resilient infrastructure. But apart from that, safe drinking water, water treatment solutions through employment of Japanese technology called Jokaso technology, these are very significant. May I therefore now make one or two small additional points? The one big thing that we need to learn from Japan is its formidable ability to skill its workforce to near perfection standards, which is why the Japanese technology comes at a certain cost, because it's also free of risk, I noticed that it's impossible to send all our young people, the millions that we want to skill in India, to Japan. You can get bigger bang for the buck in India if you were to bring in Japanese-style skilling. And this idea that we worked on when I went there in 2015, and it really gained traction in a year or so, was the idea of Japan-India Institutes of Manufacturing. So let me say that success has many fathers, but then I'd like to claim to have been integral to the setting up of the gyms as well. My idea was very simple, that if we could get in the Japanese to come in India and request each one of the private sector companies to actually contribute something to that end, we might be able to achieve something. So actually, I wrote a letter to about 500 Japanese companies. Many of the CEOs can check their archival material. They will see that I wrote letters left, right, and center. Of the 500-odd letters that I wrote proposing this idea, there was a 10% response. And I was extremely happy with that, because 10% was very good. 50 Japanese companies agreeing to look at this proposal. And in a matter of a year or two, we were able to get that to a head start. We have gyms now all around India. Suzuki has been leading in this, others like Daikin and Nimrana, and several other companies around India. They've been training thousands of people in the Japanese way of manufacturing. Japan is at the cutting edge also of artificial intelligence, big data, Internet of Things, and these are areas that we should be looking at. How do we connect this intersection between Society 5.0 of Japan and Digital India and Startup India? Japanese companies, as you know, have invested billions of dollars in Indian startups. And we've also got the Japan-India Startup Hub, which was launched in October 2018 during my time in Japan, as the interface between the industries on two sides. So we must do more to, say, link up with Hiroshima, for instance, which has cutting-edge manufacturing technology. It has an IT corridor, but it lacks in IT software industry, and that's where we can come in to partner them. We must also look at forest management. It's not something that's been mentioned so far, so let me add that. The Miyawaki forest technology of Japan is critical to our work at a time when we are looking at improving the environment and reducing the risk of climate change. I'm happy to say that I'm looking at it very closely in my capacity, my additional capacity as the Think 20 chair for India during India's G20 presidency. And I have a number of task forces to guide, one of which will, of course, look at all that we can do in terms of lifestyle for the environment. The Prime Minister's great idea of making every individual responsible for the environment. And I think that's also something that is the epitome of Japanese philosophy, where there's a personal responsibility towards nature, towards all sentient beings. The Shinto idea itself is in harmony with life as a concept that has been proposed by the Prime Minister. I see no difference there. Living beings, non-living beings, nature as Mother Nature. So let's not underestimate Japan's potential, also for Sagar and for our blue economy. I would propose that in the fisheries cold chain, we should actually look at this offer that was once made to me when I was there by the CEO of Sushi Zanmai chain of restaurants. Japan loves tuna, but there's also a great depletion in stocks, tuna stocks, in the waters around Japan. And the Japanese at one point of time were proposing that they would provide the technologies for our fisherfolk, especially off the coast of Tamil Nadu, and that we could actually fish the tuna for them. So I think there are advantages there. In the cultivation of seaweed, today you find seaweed being actually cultivated in India for the pharmaceutical sector. And what better guide can you have for the seaweed industry than Japan, which uses this as part of its great culinary tradition. Last word will be on defense and security ties. We have an AXA, an acquisition and cross-servicing agreement. And let me tell you that India is one of the few countries with which Japan has been ready to ramp up its defense engagement. So I think it's a privileged partnership in that sector, full of trust, mutual trust, full of shared values, a very clear-cut vision about where we want to take this partnership. We are the only country outside the United States with which Japan engages in ground forces joint exercises. I am happy to say that I pushed that very hard during my time there. And the first of the Dharma Guardian exercises, albeit at a platoon level, started during my time, and it's continued since. So I think that's something we must work on, not just the maritime theater, which is often spoken about. We also invited Japan for the very first time to participate in our Milan exercises. Everybody's heard about the Malabar and the Quad being, two flip sides of the same coin. But there is also the great Milan exercise, a multi-nation exercise that we host. We hosted it for the first time outside the ANN command. We did it in Visakhapatnam, that's the Eastern Command, which has a much greater and frontal outlook towards the Indo-Pacific. We will have the first of the fighter aircraft exercises in the near future. But the point I want to make is that all this does not necessarily mean that Japanese industry will come into India in the defense manufacturing space. Japan's manufacturing in defense is essentially for its own needs. It exports only about 4 to 5% by way of its defense manufactures overseas. So most of what Mitsubishi or Kawasaki produce, or Hitachi and others produce, is for their own market. Secondly, they are used to G2G. They are not used to the rough and tumble of the arms tendering process, such as the type that we have in India. And the key question here is that, will the Japanese industries be keen on coming to India to actually participate in that rough and tumble space? They have no experience there. But we must encourage them to come because they have the best of technologies, and were we to get the Japanese to step in through JVs or TOTs and things like that, it can fundamentally alter the future trajectory of our own Atmanirbhar Bharat in defense. We've made a small beginning at the level of DRDO and its counterpart ATLA in Japan in things like unmanned ground vehicles and robotics. And drones is another area where a great deal of interest is being shown by the two sides. So let me simply end by saying that we are on a sound wicket today. Ties between India and Japan are, as has already been put by others, an exemplar for the rest of the world. We have no bilateral differences. We have enough space in our relationship to discuss issues on which we may not have perfect symmetry and convergence of views. And together, I have no doubt that we will build an Indo-Pacific that is free and open, transparent, inclusive, and that does a great deal of good for the rest of Asia. Thank you very much.
A big round of applause. Thank you so much, Ambassador Chinoi, for that comprehensive opening address. I now invite Ms. Kyoko Hokugo, Minister Economic and Development at the Embassy of Japan in New Delhi.
Thank you very much, Geeta. Thank you very much for inviting me here, and thanks for Mr. Raj Shangupta, and of course the Ambassador Chinoi. I'm so glad and honored to be with in this session. So today, I think many people have already talked about the whole range of the Japan-India relations, and I would like to point out just several points. So in the current India-Japan relation, which is special strategic and global partnership. So I'm in charge of economic affairs, so mainly in economic issues, but I'd like to firstly point out just one about the rather political side, which is that India and Japan has shares common values like freedom, democracy, or human rights and rule of law. So this is a very, very important thing, and we are acting hand in hand in many areas, like in United Nations or in other international fora since a long time ago. And especially this year and next year is a super important timing that India is assuming the G20 the presidency, and Japan assumed the G7 presidency, and we coordinate very closely and to make the G20 and G7 both in a successful successful outcome. And this coordination, we have already some kind of tradition for example, in the Quad. And this is also quite important framework for us. And how it comes out right like today is that the story was already talked by other people like my ambassador. So I just would like to point out that in this framework we have already some concrete cooperation. Like in the sector of quality infrastructure, or maritime security, or counterterrorism, cybersecurity, or humanitarian assistance, and disaster relief and recovery assistance. So there are a wide range of things that we are cooperating already. And after the pandemic, we even strengthened and widened those cooperation to global health security, or climate change, and critical emerging technology. So in this framework too, Japan-India cooperation is quite important. And I would like to touch upon the economic aspect. And as already said, that there is already 5 trillion yen target for next 5 years for the Japanese investment in India. And in order to achieve this target and attract more Japanese companies to come to India, the business environment in India is crucial, and Japanese Chamber of Commerce and Industry in India prepares the proposal for India business environment enhancement every year, and they submitted this year's proposal to DPIIT very recently at the beginning of this month. And those proposals will be discussed between Japan and Indian side. And our embassy also takes up some of these proposals to negotiate with Indian government to improve the business environment here in India. So this is a good timing because India appears very attractive country of destination of investment among Japanese companies with this huge potential. So we should grasp this timing to attract more Japanese businesses to come to India. And with respect to the development cooperation by government, somebody pointed out, Japan is the top donor for India, and India is the top recipient for Japan for a long time. So we have a wide range of cooperation projects, and quality infrastructures is, among others, what Japan considers very important. And a symbolic project is, of course, the high-speed railway project from Mumbai to Ahmedabad. And what has already done is the, for example, Delhi Metro is there. And Delhi Metro corporation people is now contributing to the construct other metro projects. And the Japanese way is now diffusing all over India. So I'm very happy to see that. And not only the kind of huge projects, but we also assist local development via smaller scale projects like agriculture or forest management or producing merchandising goods using local products in rural area. And especially we put focus on the development on Northeast region. And looking at the importance of Northeast region, which is located in the center of Indo-Pacific area, we consider that the development of this region is geopolitically and strategically important from the viewpoint of realizing free and open Indo-Pacific. As India is taking Act East policy, and which is now inaugurated by Prime Minister Modi, Act Fast in Northeast, and aiming at the synergy between that policy and our cooperation, India and Japan organized Act East Forum since 2017. And there, during the 6 meetings that we have done, we have continuously reviewed our cooperation and discussed their direction to go in the future. And under this forum, Japanese road improvement projects in Meghalaya and Mizoram are underway, and some other road projects are under consideration. And we hope this will result in better connectivity within the region and with surrounding countries like Bangladesh or Myanmar, and consequently the economic growth of the region. And from the viewpoint of connectivity of Indo-Pacific region, we think the road connectivity with other surrounding countries is quite important. And Northeast region, which is landlocked, can get access to seaport in India Sea through Bangladesh. It may give the region a big chance to much easier transportation and trade opportunity. Then there may be also a chance to create value chain with Northeast and other area of the world, and this environment would attract foreign investment to Northeast, including that from Japan. In this way, we would like to help creating good environment for business in Northeast and strengthen Japan-India cooperation at the same time. And another aspect, what I would like to say is human exchange. So to deepen the relations between the two countries, human exchange is the most important thing. Now, Japan and India are in a good timing for promoting it. As Ambassador Chinoi have pointed out, Japan is in the aging population and lack of youth human resources. And in India, many talented young people are there. So we could complement each other with receiving Indian young people who could work in Japan while giving learning opportunity of Japanese technology. So it is well known that the very high qualified Indian IT professionals, but not only in the IT sector, Indians have potential to work in many areas. And as Ambassador Suzuki has pointed out, we would like to provide more opportunity of training and employment in Japan in the areas of caregiving or agriculture. And we already see some successful cases happening in Fukui Prefecture and Kochi Prefecture. So the Japanese government provides scheme called Specified Skilled Workers, as well as Technical Intern Training Program. And to help these movement in each prefecture to call Indian young people to work in their locality. And Japanese government would like to promote further these programs, which could serve people-to-people exchange between Japan and India. And now I would like to say a little bit about Japanese language. In order to live or work in Japan, it is much better or even necessary to have Japanese language skill. So for those people who come to Japan in the framework of specified skilled workers or technical intern training program, Japanese language education is indispensable part in their training. And I say in the other way, if more Indian people learn Japanese, more Indian people will come to Japan. So Japanese language education has big potential to push human exchange between our two countries. So Japanese and Indian government have been cooperating promoting Japanese language education in India, with opening training course for Japanese language teachers and founding Japanese language courses in universities. But the number of learner of Japanese language in India is 36,000 in 2021 compared to more than 1 million in China, which has around the same number of population. So there's a big room to make progress in this aspect. So I think we can do more for people-to-people exchange between Japan and India, and when the world is opening up after this COVID pandemic. So there are a few points that I wanted to raise briefly here about Japan-India relation today. And of course, for example, Dr. Jashankar and my ambassador and Ambassador Chinoi pointed out there are the many areas of cooperation, and in all areas we have to push forward. And I'm here at this very important and where we have a lot of work and timing, and but I'm very happy to work for even better Japanese-Indian relations, and thank you very much to give me this occasion, and I would be glad to learn from this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the Thank you so much for the opening address. Spoken like a true diplomat, covered all areas, but we'll begin now the conversation with Ambassador Chinoi, given that he served in government and now is a part of a very important critical think tank in a gray area, so to say, Ambassador Chinoi, given the fact that he works very closely with the government. As somebody who served within the government as the ambassador of India to Japan, the previous conversations that took place, there were some who really put forth the point of how investments from Japan are difficult. There are difficulties in execution. As somebody who served in government, how did the government of India, in its present form, really look at clearing out or ironing out these problems for investors who are looking to India and looking at India?
So let me begin by simply stating the obvious that under this government, a great deal has been done for Japanese companies to provide them the right kind of entry points, setting up a special Japan desk, etc., in the government of India, and getting the states to cooperate, getting everybody to be on the same page. And as and when there are issues that Japanese industry takes up with, the government of India, every effort is made to iron out and resolve these issues. Having said that, and having lived not just in Japan, but also having spent a lifetime dealing with China, as you know, my primary professional career was spent dealing for more than 20 years with China, 10 of which I have lived in China. And I've also lived on the east coast of China, where Japanese presence is at its maximum, whether in Shanghai or in Zhejiang or Jiangsu. So what I gathered was that countries like China, for instance, or Vietnam, for that matter, have special carve-outs for those that matter. And I, for the life of me, could never understand why we would want to have policies that are equally applicable to Japan as to Timbuktu. I would say that if you know which side your bread is buttered, go the extra mile, do what it takes to create some special, carve-outs for Japanese companies, especially where you badly think and need them to be as part of your own sort of upscaling your industry. So I think time has come for us to look very closely at what we can do extra for Japanese companies, for that matter for Korean companies. The Japanese will not be the sole benefactors of what we try to do. But we do have to make a slight distinction between the countries that matter and those that may not have the same wherewithal to come and be part of our landscape. And so let me close on that.
All right, but
do something extra for them,
but
so that you're competing in real earnest with not just China, but the others that are soaking up that investment that relocates as part of a risk mitigation strategy. When the Japanese look at China plus, look at the region beyond, we've always traditionally had to deal with one impediment, a perception issue. For most Japanese, the comfort levels ended with Southeast Asia, with Myanmar. Asia ended there. Today, there's a sea change in their thinking, and India is front and center in their vision for Asia, for the Indo-Pacific. So you have to seize this opportunity.
But I'd like to take the same question to Ms. Hokugo. Would you agree with the ambassador, or is there a difference in alignment of India's nimble foreign policy as opposed to a federal structure where your investors or Japan really has to look at state governments as well and work with state governments? Does that become an impediment? I give an example of the high-speed rail project, where land acquisition had become one of the biggest problem areas for the Japanese.
Yes, it is true that you're in the federal system, and for Japanese businesses, for example, they should be located somewhere in some state, and then they face suddenly not only the national level regulation, but also the state level thing, and which is different from state to state, and sometimes it changes, and sometimes not clear. And of course, that's a challenge for the Japanese people to understand or to cope with. So of course, it depends on the country by country. The system is of course different from one to another, and India adopts this federal system, and maybe the Japanese people can adapt with that. Of course, it comes sometimes as be seen as an impediment, but.
Sujan, I'd come to you in terms of the fact that, and Kyoko-san had mentioned this, the connectivity with the Northeast, looking across Myanmar and Thailand and seeing a road connectivity that is there. But in terms of our contribution, there seems to be a sense that things are not moving fast enough, one. And two, there was even talk of a Asia-Africa growth corridor, and where India, Japan were supposed to collaborate on this. That seems to be more like Japan doing it rather than India. What are the issues that we face in terms of execution and implementation? First you, and then subsequently we can ask Kyoko-san to give her viewpoint on this.
So as far as the Act East policy is concerned, and now the intersection between our Act East policy and Japan is known as the Act East Forum, which was set up in the month of December 2017, if I'm not mistaken. Now, personally, I would like the focus of this Act East Forum. This is what you call gratuitous advice that I'm giving, Raj. But the point is, focus more on what we can do to capitalize on Japan's presence in the Northeast per se. At a much later stage, we can talk about, connectivity beyond. But I wouldn't want to mix up the two. The greatest benefit that I see would be in having Japan simply come in per se, in building roads, infrastructure, etc., the highways that are being built there. I think Highway 50, 51, you name it, there are several. And more than that, how can we use Japanese technologies to ramp up the, say, agro-processing sector in the Northeast, where evacuation of produce is very difficult and what can we do to improve, for instance, orange production, last mile village development, capacity building, empowerment projects, including for instance, women in the villages. That's where I think the great advantage of Japan lies. For me, the Kaladan project and how to connect to Thailand and beyond, and because then you are looking at a far more geostrategic landscape, where the intersection of interests may not always be final. For instance, when you look at the Belt and Road Initiative, India has a view, Japan has a view, the Japanese government has a view, the Japanese industry has a view. And you might find that on Belt and Road, there are areas where Japanese industry and Chinese industry have a history of working together. And frankly, to each according to his own. I mean, you cannot wish everything your way. We have a fundamental principled position on the Belt and Road.
But the larger point of us being...
So now Afro-Asian, if I may just...
execution.
Yeah.
I think one of the complaints is that we are not, executing fast enough. And whether you look at Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, there are projects that are there as well, but we're just not moving on that direction.
So for me,
what is the thing that we need to do?
Solution is very simple.
Yeah.
On all things, you must have specialized people, and you must have continuity. If you have this kind of revolving door system in which people come and occupy a position for 2 years, 3 years, deal with Japan, deal with this, deal with that, next minute you see them, they are dealing with a totally different field, not much is going to be done. You please create the right kind of incentives for people in government at the central level, at the state level to specialize and be around for a long time. Give them that continuity. This is what I have seen in countries like China and Vietnam, where 10 years later, you still have the same, deputy mayor or somebody dealing with you, offering you facilities. We don't have that system. A certain anonymity creeps in the moment there is a change in incumbency, and you start all over again. As far as Afro-Asian, Asia-Africa Growth Corridor is concerned, let me just put it this way, that it's a jolly good idea, which was also later overtaken in part by the great momentum that we saw in the vision of the Indo-Pacific. So it was kind of subsumed. It's not as if it's extinct, but it became one of the sub-tracks or relatively minor themes in a much broader vision of the Indo-Pacific. Secondly, Japan operates in Africa in a space that is slightly different from that of India. India's partners there are the low-income countries, least developed countries. Japan's typical model there, riding high on its technologies and areas of excellence, is not necessarily in the LDCs and the most needy in Africa. So the footprint is different. Trying to combine these two footprints, they may look similar, but one belongs to the leopard, the other belongs to the lion, or a jaguar or a jaguar, as you would say. They look similar. They have the same rosettes, they have the same spots, but the paw marks are different.
So Kyoko, do you look at us as the Indian tiger or just a pussycat when it comes to all these projects?
I totally agree with Ambassador Chinoi that we have to concretize the projects as it is, and that's what we are doing in Northeast region, for example. And of course, we are also drawing the big picture as well, but of course, this is just not just, but we are under the discussion. This idea is under the discussion, and if this big picture becomes more and more reality, and of course, in making it reality, maybe there are several parts that doesn't match, and if that happens, then we have to rethink about it. But of course, most important, and what Japan has been doing for a long time in the world, is that do what the very concrete projects, doing until the end, and achieve the kind of what we projected at the beginning. And I think we are doing that in Northeast region. And for example, the buckwheat project, the mushroom project, and forest management, and of course road construction. We have to think about, of course, a road after the frontier, what will happen. But we are, of course, doing those projects which we think, well, it's good for the development of those region. And we would like to achieve until the end all these. And about the India-Africa corridor, what I recently hear is that Japanese company stationing here in India have the appetite to export to Africa. And this is a bit different thing, but this flow, it may be another kind of India-Africa relationship, and with some cooperation with Japan. So I'm looking for that.
Could I just add a little bit to that, little soundbite? I think we need to leave this part to industry that understands each other's strengths best. There was a time when we tried to get the two sides together at the industry level, rather than broad strategic vision all the time. Let the dollars and yen and rupees speak for themselves, because they have a natural proclivity to find each other through that thicket of the fog of international business. So that's one point. The second point is that companies like Panasonic, for instance, shifted some of their base for Africa to India. There are others also who are quite willing to look at it. We could do a lot together in the training space in India. We have a lot of projects going on in Africa where we want to, apart from the lines of credit that go beyond US dollars 10, 12 billion, we are looking at training and skills development. Now that's where we can actually bring a certain confluence of India and Japan acting jointly in India to bring people out, not just under the ITEC program, but also under some kind of a bilateral program. That would really be a win-win situation.
We'll shift focus to strategic and China issues, but before that I'd like to go back to Kyoko. Kyoko, in terms of investments and companies looking at India, it's not recent, but my conversations with companies from Japan also, a lot of people would, a lot of them would say that distance is a problem, culture certainly is. Back then they used to. Is that still the case? And when you look at, or Japanese companies look at India, what's the kind of threat assessment that they do? Do they look at the social issues, certain inter-religious or inter-caste clashes in certain states? Do they become a problem? I'm asking you this because Maruti had suffered at the hands of the Jat clashes in Gurgaon, coming from that. So, and there were Japanese who were stranded in the Maruti factory when those clashes really took place. So are these considerations of Japan and Japanese companies, the security scenario for them in India?
I don't know about the Maruti Suzuki's the systems, but to be very frank, I think among Japanese people or Japanese companies, normal Japanese companies, the idea of India, business in India is a bit, in their feeling, a bit far away than business in ASEAN countries or in Chinese, because there are many cases in Vietnam or Thailand or in China, so they are a little bit familiar with, maybe they hear from their counterparts about how the business in China or how the business in Vietnam, but there are much less number of companies already working, doing business in India, and that's one thing. And so for Japanese companies who wish to do the business abroad, first consideration maybe China, but recently, I don't know, maybe in Vietnam. So, and India comes a bit lower in that rank. That's, I think, reality. So I think I would like to change that. I really would like to change that. But of course, there are many companies knowing that India has a big potential, huge market with young population, and there's much room to how can I say, develop, and that's fascinating part, and we need to appeal that, and we have to promote more how the life in India looks like, and I think many Japanese people would like to go, but they never think about it for the moment.
No, just to add, I think you made a very important observation, Kyoko-san, and one of the things that we've been trying to do post-COVID is, or during COVID, was to be the China +1 and we be the one, not Vietnam and not the other ASEAN countries that's there. How does India actually capture this opportunity? How can we, what is it that Japan is looking for India to do? I mean,
I'm looking for the answer of that. Please tell me if you have a good idea.
Right.
Could I chip in on that?
Please,
Yeah,
please
and
do.
Geeta I think wants to take some China questions from you. So
Before you get there,
Yes.
when I was there, I was often told by Japanese industry that please do something to solve our genuine problems. And I said, what is that genuine problem? And there, I was often told by Japanese industry that please do something to solve our genuine problems. And I said, what is that genuine problem? And so one turned out to be, for instance, lack of access to Japanese food around India.
It is true.
And secondly, in places like Gujarat, where they have a huge presence, growing presence, not just Suzuki in Hansalpur in Mehsana district, but also elsewhere in Gujarat near Sanand, for instance, you have other Japanese companies. Is this business of not having any bars or restaurants where people can go and have a normal time? And so I actually explored while I was there this whole idea of sending refrigerated containers from Japan to India through the Indian Postal Department, where they could actually online order their sushi and other food and enjoy it in whatever remote part in India, in tier 2, tier 3 cities that their factories have come up. And as far as, say, a state like Gujarat is concerned, I did try to put in a word. Permits are available, but permits also mean that you can only access, a drink or something like that in your homes, in the privacy of your homes, which is anathema to a Japanese executive who would love to go out with his friends and have a good time after a hard day of work, So you've got to create these niche areas, comfort zones for them. And which is why I said take a page or two out of the book of, yes, China, Vietnam. By the way, Vietnam and Thailand offer only niche area, landscape for investment. If it's electronics and phones and stuff and all in Vietnam, it's automobiles in Thailand. India is the only one that can offer that full spectrum of areas for investment. So let's get started on that.
Okay. Let's move on to the...
Can I
yes,
just
please, go ahead.
add one thing? I said I'm looking for the answer, but one answer is that the youth engagement. When the people are know India from the younger age, they may have much how can I say, the closer feeling to the India. So as Ambassador talked a little bit about the Ideathon, which is carried out by the Japanese Commerce and Chamber of Commerce and Industry and some Japanese association, that those kind of real engagement between Japanese and Indian young peoples are very, very useful to create the future Indian, Japanese, India, like Japanese businessman who loves India and who wish to go to India.
Okay, we're running out of time, but do I have permission to ask just one question on China? Coming from TV, you'd think it's a hawkish line that I'm taking, but not. Now, what happens with China is India is always open to criticism from various quarters, the Indian government, on why is India doing business with China when you have problems at the border. Now, India and Japan are more aligned on this one area where both the countries closer to China have problems with China and yet do a lot of business. Is there more understanding of the China situation when it comes to India and Japan as opposed to all other countries or even people and parties within the country?
You're asking?
Yes.
So, let's put it this way. In a globalized economy, it is not for the asking to cut loose and sail away whenever there is a problem. You just can't do it. That is the nature of a globalized economy. You have allowed your industry, essentially, as distinct from government and armies and militaries, to take a view about who produces what at the best possible price and in terms of supply chains. This is granted for all private sector around the world. Over time, these supply chains have evolved in a certain geography or another geography. And so I think these are separate matters. I think in my remarks, I did say that having excellent political level or strategic ties does not automatically translate into equally excellent trade and economic ties. And conversely, the absence of convergence at the political level does not necessarily mean that you will not have, deep economic ties. So Japan, China is a fine example of, having cumulative investments today. Japan has roughly $120 billion worth of cumulative investments in China. Even now, a couple of $1 billion every year go to China. India has $38 billion worth of Japanese investments cumulatively. And their trade is humongous. As you know, it's like $320 billion. And ours is $20 billion. So when you decouple, you must also be ready to accept the pain of decoupling. And especially if you do not have in your own landscape the necessary facilities, capacities, technologies. All this takes time to build. Now in healthcare, we have seen how we were able to, not just India, but the rest of the world, sought to decouple from a certain geography. It was a question of life and death. And we've been able to actually achieve so much in healthcare. From zero, we've gone like a Ferrari to 100 kilometers an hour. We're producing everything now. But to do that takes time. It needs an intense study by our chambers of commerce on what are the areas where we could actually, over the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, if we do have the HR, we may not have the investments. If we have the investments, we may not have the technologies. And so how do you bring all that to fruition? And with whose help? Is it going to be simply the government of India? Will it take partners to do that, like Japan?
I think last word for Kyoko-san on relations with China and Japan and the fact that you'll continue to engage despite having this thing. What is the lessons India can learn from that kind of thing? Should we be, as Geeta was saying, clamp down on China, or should we, how do you manage it?
Well, I totally agree with what His Excellency said. The business decision is done by their own and not with the diplomatic relations or country-to-country relation. It's we cannot really stop or something. And of course, we means government has sometimes changed policy to, for example, regulate the sensitive technology to not to be the spill out to the other countries. And that changed some environment of the business. But otherwise, I think we cannot really regulate or whatever to the business people because they are free and they are free to do the business wherever they would like to do. So, of course, government needs to think about what should be kept safe in. And we are trying to fix that law and with economic security promotion law. I think that was adopted this year, and maybe another revision will be done next year. But in that way, we try to avoid some kind of dangerous the situation. But otherwise, of course, the business are doing what they would like to do.
Raj, I want to add one more thing. You can do it much more in the investment space and much less in the trade space. In investment, as the government of India has done, post Galwan 2020, etc., they're also checking on ultimate beneficiary owners, etc., to see how FDI is coming in, what exactly it entails for control of industry in India. So you can control the investment space, as India has successfully done, to keep out of your economy interests that are directly inimical to your sovereign interests. But in trade, it is much more difficult to do that.
A very important point and takeaway, that sensitive technology information governments are trying to control and ensure does not get into Chinese hands. But on every other front, China is a dominating force. Thank you so much for joining us, giving us a perspective of what governments should do and what governments are doing. Thank you, Ms. Kyoko and Ambassador Chinoi.
Thank you so much. If you could just hold on stage for a moment. Mr. Bharat Joshi, Chairman Joshi, Chinoi Transport and Infrastructure, could I please invite you on stage to offer a token of our appreciation to the panelists?